I never thought a piece of land could become such a part of who I am. My father used to say, "Son, land doesn't just belong to you, you belong to it." When I inherited the wetlands from him, I didn't fully understand what he meant. The place wasn't pretty by most people's standards. It wasn't a mountain cabin or a beach house. It was a stretch of low, soggy earth, full of cattails, frogs, and the constant hum of insects. But to me, it was sacred ground. It was peace. It was where the morning fog rolled in like a dream, where herons glided low over still water, and where I could hear the whisper of wind in the reeds better than any sermon or city noise. I lived alone on that land for the better part of 15 years. I built a small wooden cabin with my own 2 hands, raised chickens, and even planted willows around the pond to keep the soil strong. I knew every sound the land made, every croak, buzz, and rustle. I knew when a storm was coming just by the way the air shifted. The wetlands weren't just a place to me, they were a living memory of my father, my childhood, and everything good that was ever steady in my life. That was before the HOA came. Now, if you've never had to deal with a homeowners association, count yourself lucky. They're supposed to protect property values and keep neighborhoods beautiful, but in reality, most of them are just small groups of people who love power more than peace. I didn't even live in their subdivision. My property sat on the edge of their newly developed neighborhood, Cedar Oaks Estates. Fancy name for a bunch of cookie-cutter houses lined up like matchsticks. They had their rules, their signs, their perfectly mowed lawns. And then there was me, living just outside their reach. Or so I thought. It started small. Flyers left on my gate about community regulations. Notices taped to my fence asking me to maintain the view for the neighboring homeowners. I laughed the first few times. I wasn't even part of their HOA, and my land was officially zoned as agricultural conservation land. Meaning, they had no jurisdiction. But they didn't care. The HOA board president, a woman named Karen McBride, made it her personal mission to clean up the eyesore at the edge of Cedar Oaks. Karen was one of those people who thought authority made her invincible. She drove a white SUV that she parked diagonally across 2 spaces at the clubhouse, wore sunglasses even on cloudy days, and talked like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. She once told me, word for word, "You're lowering the tone of our community." I told her, "Lady, your community stops at that fence. Beyond that, it's my land, my rules, my wetlands." She smiled, but it was that tight, condescending smile that meant she wasn't done with me yet. A few months later, I found orange survey flags stuck in my soil. That was the first time I felt that cold rush of panic that I hadn't felt since my father died. I followed the flags all the way down to the tree line, where a group of men in hard hats were driving stakes into the ground. I asked them what they were doing. They said, "Highway extension, sir. Approved by the Cedar Oaks HOA in partnership with the county." My heart stopped. A highway? Through my wetlands? I told them they were on private land, but they just shrugged. "Our maps say otherwise." It took me weeks to even get someone from the county to return my calls. When they finally did, they told me there'd been a boundary error on the development map years ago. According to their new survey, a portion of my property was now designated as public easement land, usable for infrastructure. My father's land. My wetlands. My sanctuary. Gone, just like that, because some HOA board wanted a better exit road for their residents. I filed complaints, appealed to the county board, even hired a lawyer. But money talks louder than farmers. Every time I showed up at a hearing, Karen was there in her navy blazer, smiling like the queen of a chessboard where I was just another pawn. "It's for the greater good," she'd say, "we're improving community access." But I knew better. They wanted a shortcut highway connecting Cedar Oaks to the main interstate, a convenience project to boost their property values. And my wetlands were in the way. By the time the bulldozers came, I'd lost most of my fight in court. Watching them tear through the soil felt like watching someone carve through my father's grave. I stood at the edge of the construction site, fists clenched, as machines roared through the cattails, crushing nests and roots and everything that had been alive there. I shouted, I recorded videos, I even called the sheriff. He told me to stand down. "They've got permits, son," he said. "Ain't nothing we can do now." For weeks, the noise never stopped. The sound of engines, concrete trucks, and hammering became my nightmare soundtrack. The once quiet wetlands were now a scar of dirt and gravel. They built the road right over the natural water flow, cutting the wetlands in half. I warned them about flooding, told them that the land wasn't meant to be paved, it breathed through water. But no one listened. Karen told the local paper that I was an uncooperative landholder resisting progress. Then came the rain. At first, it was just a heavy storm, nothing unusual for our county. The wetlands could take a beating. They'd absorbed floods before like a sponge. But this time, the water had nowhere to go. The highway acted like a dam, trapping water on one side. I watched from my porch as the waterline crept higher each day, swallowing my garden, then the chicken coop, then the base of the cabin stairs. By the third day, it wasn't a storm anymore, it was a flood. The sky stayed black for days, thunder rolling like war drums. The new asphalt cracked, and the fancy drainage systems the HOA bragged about overflowed like broken pipes. Cars from Cedar Oaks floated away like toys. People who used to glare at me from their SUVs were now knocking on my door asking for help. And for the first time in years, I saw something I never thought I'd see, Karen McBride standing knee-deep in muddy water, screaming into her phone, powerless. By the fifth day, everything was gone. The highway tore apart under the force of the flood. The wetlands rose and swallowed everything, roads, fences, and houses alike. It was like nature had decided to take back what was hers. The county declared the area a disaster zone. Rescue boats came. News crews called it the historic Cedar Oaks flood. But I didn't need the news to tell me what it was. It was justice, raw, merciless justice. The kind my father used to talk about when he said, "The land remembers." When the waters finally began to recede, I stood on my porch, or what was left of it, and watched the sunrise reflect off the new lakes that had formed. The road was gone. The HOA was gone. Even Karen's big white SUV was half buried in mud down by the old property line. Everything they'd built had been wiped clean. And in that silence, broken only by the soft ripple of water, I finally understood what my father meant all those years ago. The land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. And when we forget that, when we try to bend it, pave it, and control it, it reminds us, in the only language it knows. The language of floods. When the floodwaters finally began to drain back toward the river, the land didn't look like the place I had once called home. It looked ancient, wild, and strangely pure, like the earth had stripped off its man-made scars. The asphalt from the highway had cracked open like a broken bone, slabs of black road scattered across what used to be dry ground. The wooden fences from Cedar Oaks were tangled in tree branches, and rooftops floated down the creek like lost ships. My cabin still stood, barely, but the porch leaned, and the foundation had shifted so much that every step made the walls groan. The county sent emergency crews within days, handing out blankets, water bottles, and hollow promises of rebuilding stronger than before. Reporters came with their cameras, calling it the storm of the century. They interviewed homeowners crying over their lost houses and cars. But not one of them mentioned the wetlands, the natural system that once protected this place. Not one of them admitted that the flood wasn't just a disaster. It was a reckoning. I stayed behind when most of the Cedar Oaks folks moved out temporarily. My land, for all its destruction, still called to me. I started cleaning what I could, pulling branches off the roof, digging through the mud for what little I could salvage. My father's old tools were gone, washed away somewhere downstream. The chickens were lost. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, a mix of mud, oil, and something older. But beneath that, there was also a kind of sweetness, the smell of wet earth reclaiming its breath after years of suffocation. For weeks, I lived off canned food and rainwater. The power grid was down, and the only sounds at night were frogs returning to the pools that had formed where the road used to be. Nature was healing faster than the people. It amazed me how quickly the land began to reset itself once the machines were silent. The cattails came back first, their stalks pushing through the mud like stubborn survivors. Then the dragonflies. Then the herons. It was like watching resurrection unfold right before my eyes. One morning, about 2 weeks after the flood, a government truck rolled up the dirt path that used to be the road to my property. Out stepped a man in a neon vest and a hard hat. He looked uncomfortable standing in all that wild green, like the silence unnerved him. "Mr. Lawson?" he asked. "That's me. I'm with the County Recovery Division. We're assessing structural and environmental damage. Mind if I take a look around?" I didn't say yes or no, I just nodded and let him walk. He carried a tablet, took pictures, and muttered numbers under his breath. When he came back, he looked uneasy. "You're not going to like what I have to tell you," he said. "Try me." He scratched his neck. "Your property's been flagged as high risk." The floodplain expanded. According to our new zoning, this land might not be inhabitable anymore. The county's recommending relocation. I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You mean you're still trying to take it?" He frowned. "Sir, that's not, don't sir me," I snapped. "You people paved through a wetland that's been here longer than this county existed, ignored every warning I gave, and now that the land fought back, you're calling it uninhabitable. That's not nature's fault. That's yours." He didn't argue. Maybe he knew I was right. He just sighed, handed me a pamphlet about disaster relief housing options, and walked back to his truck. I watched him drive away, his tires spinning mud into the air like smoke. For a while, it felt like everyone wanted to erase what had happened. The HOA was quiet, too quiet. Their grand clubhouse was half collapsed, and most of their board members had moved to hotels in the city. But I knew Karen McBride hadn't gone far. She was the type who couldn't stand to lose control. Sure enough, about a month after the flood, she showed up again. I was patching the side of my cabin with salvaged planks when her white SUV rolled up, tires still caked with dried mud. She stepped out wearing rubber boots and a spotless blazer, her hair tied up in a bun that screamed, "I'm still in charge." "Well," she said, looking around. "This place certainly took a beating." I didn't even look at her. "It's called nature reclaiming what's hers." She ignored the jab. "The HOA board met last week. We're working with the county to rebuild Cedar Oaks. There's a plan to reroute the highway slightly, raise it above the flood line, and restore parts of the wetlands as a scenic community feature. You'll be compensated, of course." "Compensated?" I turned to face her. "You already stole my land once. You think money makes it right?" Her lips tightened. "You're being emotional, Mr. Lawson. This is progress. We can't just abandon the area." "Progress?" I stepped closer. "Progress is learning from your mistakes, not repeating them. You didn't just flood your fancy neighborhood, you drowned my home, my history, my father's legacy. And now you're talking about turning it into a scenic feature." She crossed her arms. "You're lucky the HOA is even considering including you in the redevelopment plan." I laughed again, colder this time. "You don't get it, Karen. You can build whatever you want. But this land doesn't want you here anymore. You've been warned once. It won't be kind the second time." For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes, not anger, but fear. Maybe she felt it too. The land wasn't done yet. She left soon after, muttering something about legal channels and negotiations. But her visit stirred something in me, a quiet fury that wouldn't rest. They were going to do it again. They hadn't learned a damn thing. So I started documenting everything. I bought a used drone from a guy in town and began recording footage of the wetlands as they regenerated. I filmed the water patterns, the returning wildlife, and how the soil soaked up every drop like a living organism. I started posting the videos online, under the title, "The Land Remembers." At first, a few locals watched. Then environmental pages started sharing them. Within weeks, I had thousands of views. People began to reach out, environmental groups, journalists, even a professor from a nearby university who specialized in wetland ecology. They told me my footage was valuable, that it showed something extraordinary, the land's natural process of self-healing. One of them, Dr. Olivia Hart, came out to see it for herself. She was in her late 30s, calm and sharp-eyed, the kind of person who spoke softly but carried authority. When she walked through the soaked fields with her boots sinking into the mud, she looked like she belonged there. "This place is remarkable," she said, kneeling to test the soil. "You said they built a road straight through here." "Right across it," I said. "Blocked the natural water channels. I warned them this would happen." She nodded slowly. "Well, you were right. These wetlands act as a natural flood buffer. By paving over them, they destroyed the area's drainage equilibrium. This flood wasn't just predictable, it was inevitable." Her words hit me hard. Inevitable. That meant it wasn't some freak act of God. It was man's arrogance catching up. Dr. Hart took samples, photos, and promised to file an environmental impact report. "If we can prove the county violated conservation statutes, they'll have to halt redevelopment," she said. "You could help protect this entire ecosystem." For the first time since the flood, I felt a flicker of hope. Not revenge, something deeper. Maybe there was still a way to make things right. Over the next few weeks, we worked together. She brought her students, set up measuring tools, and collected data while I provided the local insight only years of living there could offer. We watched new streams carve paths through the ruins of the highway, saw birds returning in flocks, and even found turtles nesting near what used to be the HOA's drainage ditches. It was like watching nature write its own Declaration of Independence. But the county and the HOA didn't see it that way. When the story hit the local news, "Environmental Study Challenges County Redevelopment," Karen lost her mind. She accused me of trespassing, harassment, and spreading misinformation. She even filed a complaint claiming I'd damaged HOA property by flying a drone over their land. Except there was no more HOA land. The flood had redrawn everything. By summer, the fight had turned political. There were public meetings, arguments, and threats. But this time, I wasn't standing alone in a courtroom being ignored. This time, I had experts, footage, data, and public support. People were furious that taxpayer money was being used to rebuild luxury homes in a disaster zone. The story went national. Karen showed up at one of the hearings, face pale but voice still sharp. "You're turning our tragedy into your personal crusade," she hissed when we crossed paths outside. "No," I said quietly. "I'm letting the truth speak. You just don't like what it's saying." The wetlands had become a symbol of greed, resilience, and balance. And deep down, I knew the land still had more to say. Because even though the flood had passed, the ground was still shifting. Cracks opened where the highway once ran, water bubbling up from deep underground like veins reconnecting. Sometimes, at night, I could hear it, the distant rumble of water moving beneath the earth. It wasn't a threat. It was a heartbeat. The land was alive again. And I swore I'd protect it this time, no matter the cost. By late summer, the wetlands were alive in a way I'd never seen before. The ground pulsed with new growth, you could almost feel it breathing beneath your boots. Every morning, mist rose off the pools like smoke from a sleeping giant. The air carried that rich, earthy scent of rebirth. Even after all the chaos, I found myself smiling again, because despite everything they did to it, the land refused to die. But not everyone saw it that way. To the HOA and the developers, my home wasn't a symbol of nature's resilience. It was an obstacle, a stubborn reminder of their failure. I began receiving letters again. First from the county, warning me about potential zoning violations due to unsafe living conditions. Then from the HOA's lawyers, accusing me of environmental obstruction. They claimed my unauthorized conservation activities were delaying the county's rebuilding project. It was absurd, every word of it. But I knew what it really meant. Karen was behind it. She wanted me gone. I'd seen it before, her kind of persistence. When people like Karen lose control, they don't back off, they double down. She wanted her clean, perfect subdivision back. She wanted that highway rebuilt, even if it meant paving over the bones of her mistakes. But this time, I wasn't the same man she'd bullied before. I had evidence. I had allies. And I had the one thing that couldn't be bought, a voice that people had started to listen to. My channel, The Land Remembers, had grown beyond anything I expected. Viewers weren't just watching my drone footage anymore, they were engaging, sharing, donating. People from all over the country sent messages, retired farmers, environmentalists, teachers, even kids. They all said the same thing, that my story reminded them of something they'd lost. Their roots. Their connection to the earth. Dr. Hart suggested we organize a field conference, a public open day for journalists and environmental experts to witness the wetlands recovery firsthand. She said if people could see the land, feel it, the county wouldn't be able to ignore us anymore. I agreed. We set the date for mid-September. The morning of the event, the sun broke through a layer of mist that hung low over the field. The air shimmered with dew, and the sound of frogs echoed in the background. We set up a few fold-out tables, charts, and display boards showing before and after photos of the land. By 10 a.m., cars started arriving, reporters, students, and locals curious about the man who defied the HOA. I stood beside Dr. Hart as she spoke about soil permeability, ecological restoration, and how wetlands act as natural filters for floodwaters. People nodded, took notes, recorded videos. It felt like progress, real, honest progress. Then I saw her. Karen McBride. She stood near the back of the crowd, wearing dark sunglasses and a forced smile, flanked by two men in county jackets. One of them held a clipboard. The other carried a camera. Who invited them? I muttered to Dr. Hart. She frowned. It's a public event. They must have heard. Karen didn't interrupt at first. She just observed, whispering to her companions and snapping photos. But near the end, as Dr. Hart opened the floor for questions, she stepped forward. I have one, Karen said loudly, her voice slicing through the murmurs. How much of this so-called recovery is natural, and how much has been tampered with by unauthorized individuals conducting unregulated experiments? The crowd turned to look at her. Dr. Hart straightened. All research conducted here is fully documented and environmentally compliant. Nothing has been tampered with. Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. I find that hard to believe, considering this man, she pointed at me, has a history of hostility toward the Cedar Oaks community and has repeatedly interfered with county infrastructure. I took a step forward. The only thing I interfered with was your destruction. Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras flashed. You paved over a wetland, I said, my voice rising. You ignored warnings, ignored nature, and people suffered for it. And now, instead of taking responsibility, you're still trying to cover it up with paperwork and fake progress. Karen's jaw tightened. You're emotional, Mr. Lawson, you're damn right I am, I interrupted. Because this isn't just about property lines or permits. It's about respect. The land was here long before Cedar Oaks, and it'll be here long after. You can't bully the earth into silence. Applause broke out before I even finished. A few reporters pushed forward, shoving microphones near me. Karen's face flushed red, and for the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just turned, whispered something to the county men, and left. That day changed everything. Within a week, local news stations were airing segments about the wetlands man versus the HOA. Some painted me as a folk hero, others called me an obstructionist. But the attention put real pressure on the county. They couldn't move forward with redevelopment while the environmental report was under review. And thanks to Dr. Hart's findings, that review wasn't going in their favor. The wetlands were officially recognized as a critical natural buffer zone. That meant no construction without federal approval. For the HOA, that was a death sentence. Their highway plans were frozen. Their investors pulled out. Homeowners started suing the board for mismanagement. Cedar Oaks began to crumble from the inside out. But victory didn't feel like I expected. One night, I sat on my porch, watching the moon ripple across the dark pools where the road used to be. The frogs were singing again, the reeds swayed gently, and the stars reflected off the water like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful, but it was also lonely. The flood had taken so much, not just from me, but from everyone. I thought about the people who'd lost their homes, families who'd never asked for this war between greed and nature. They'd trusted the HOA to keep them safe, and instead, they'd been betrayed. I wondered if they blamed me, or if, deep down, they knew the truth too. One of those nights, around midnight, I heard a car approaching, slow, cautious. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The vehicle stopped a few yards from my gate. The headlights cut through the fog, and then I saw her, Karen, standing in the beam of her own SUV lights, holding something in her hands. Karen. I called out cautiously. She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. I didn't know where else to go. I hesitated, unsure if it was some new tactic. What do you want? She stepped closer, mud splashing around her boots. In her hands, she held a stack of papers, wet, folded, and crumpled. They're replacing me, she said quietly. The HOA board. The county wants to investigate the permits I signed off on. They're blaming me for everything. I stayed silent. I thought, if I could just make things right, they'd forgive me, she said. But they won't. They're all turning on me. She looked up, and for a brief second, I saw not the polished, ruthless woman who'd ruined my land, but a person. Tired. Frightened. Human. I came to apologize, she whispered. I should have listened to you. The words hung in the cold air between us. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe that maybe she'd learned something. But another part of me, the part that still smelled the diesel in the soil and heard the bulldozers in my nightmares, couldn't let it go. Apologies don't bring back what's gone, I said finally. She nodded, tears glinting in the headlights. I know. Then she handed me the papers. These are the original development maps. You should see them. You were right all along, the county moved the boundary line illegally. They knew. And just like that, she turned and walked back to her car. The engine started, the lights vanished into the mist, and I was left standing there with the proof of everything I'd been fighting for. Inside the cabin, I spread the papers across my table. They were stamped, signed, dated years before the project began. The wetlands had never been part of Cedar Oaks' jurisdiction. The highway was built entirely on private conservation land, mine. My hands shook. After all those years, all those sleepless nights, all that loss, the truth was right here in ink and paper. They'd stolen my land knowingly. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I drove into town, the documents sealed in a plastic bag. Dr. Hart met me at her office, eyes wide as she read through them. "This changes everything," she said. "If this is authentic, it's not just an environmental violation, it's criminal fraud." We took the evidence to the county courthouse. Within a week, an investigation was launched. Local papers picked up the story, then state outlets, then national. Illegal highway scandal rocks county government. For the first time, the truth had weight, and it was heavier than concrete. But what struck me most wasn't the headlines. It was how quiet the wetlands became after that. As if the land itself was finally resting, satisfied that its story had been told. I still walked the property every morning, watching the light shift over the pools and grasses. The scars were still there, but they were fading. In their place, life was blooming again. And for the first time since the flood, I didn't feel like I was fighting. I felt like I was home. The news spread faster than I expected. By the end of the month, every local paper, radio station, and even a few national outlets were talking about the wetlands highway scandal. It was strange hearing my name on TV. Local landowner Samuel Lawson uncovers illegal HOA-backed construction deal. Reporters called me the wetlands man, as if I were some mythic character instead of a tired, mud-covered farmer who just wanted his peace back. The investigation uncovered everything. The HOA board, led by Karen McBride, had lobbied county officials to redraw property maps years earlier, quietly, without any legal approval. They'd bribed a surveyor to file a correction that shifted my property line by just enough to build their highway access road. When the county planners noticed, the paperwork had already been verified. Everyone looked the other way because the project promised new tax revenue. But now, there was no ignoring it. There were audits, resignations, and even arrests. Karen's signature was on half the forged documents, but so was the county commissioner's. She'd been the face of the project, but not its mastermind. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became, she'd been a pawn in a much bigger game. The day the arrests began, I stood on the ridge overlooking the wetlands. The morning mist clung to the ground like memory. The water shimmered gold under the rising sun, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange calm. Justice, slow and crooked though it was, had finally reached this place. Dr. Hart called later that day. "Sam," she said, her voice bright, "the Department of Environmental Protection just issued a permanent preservation order for your land. It's officially protected territory now. No more construction, no more development, ever." I closed my eyes, letting that sink in. "You mean, it's safe?" "It's safe," she said. "You did it." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Because the truth was, I hadn't done it alone. The land had done most of the work. It had shown the world what human arrogance looked like when it collapsed under its own weight. That evening, the sky turned orange and pink. I walked down to the waterline where the old highway used to be. Only fragments of asphalt remained, jutting out like broken teeth. Between them, grass and reeds had already begun to grow. A heron landed nearby, folding its wings as if claiming the place anew. I thought about my father then, his calloused hands, his slow laugh, the way he used to pause before every decision, like he was listening to something only he could hear. I wished he'd been here to see it. To see that his land, his legacy, had survived everything thrown at it. But the peace didn't last long. A few days later, I received a letter, not from the county this time, but from Karen. It was handwritten, mailed directly to my cabin. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what I'd find. "Mr. Lawson, you were right. About everything. The county used me, and I was too proud to see it. I thought I was in control, but I was just another signature to them. I've lost everything, my home, my reputation, my career. But maybe I deserved that. Maybe this was the only way I'd ever learn what power really means. If it's not too much to ask, I'd like to visit the wetlands once more before I leave town. Not as an HOA president. Just as someone who needs to see what she destroyed." Karen McBride. I stared at the letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw it into the fire. But another part, maybe the part my father raised in me, knew that closure mattered. So I wrote back a single line, "Come tomorrow at dawn." The next morning, I was already waiting when her SUV pulled up. It was no longer shiny and proud, its sides were dented, paint faded, tires half sunk in mud. Karen stepped out quietly, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt instead of her usual blazer. She looked smaller somehow, as if the world had finally stripped away everything false. She didn't speak right away. We walked side by side down the slope toward the water. The silence between us was heavy but not hostile. The wetland stretched before us like an open wound that had finally begun to heal. "I used to think control was the same thing as strength," she said finally. "But out here, it feels like the land doesn't care who's in charge." "It doesn't," I said. "That's what makes it honest." She nodded slowly. "I've been subpoenaed. They want me to testify against the commissioner and the developer. I'm going to do it. That's the right thing." She glanced at me. "You still hate me?" I didn't answer right away. I don't think I can hate anyone who's finally listening. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. A breeze rippled through the reeds, carrying the scent of clean water and mud. She knelt down, dipped her hand into the shallow pool beside the old roadbed, and let the water run through her fingers. "It's colder than I thought," she whispered. "Because it's real," I said. She stood, brushed her hands off, and looked out across the horizon. "Take care of this place, Sam. It deserves someone who listens." Then she turned, walked back to her SUV, and drove away for the last time. I didn't see her again after that. The trials went on for months. The county commissioner was convicted on charges of fraud and abuse of power. The developer fled the state. Karen's testimony helped bring them down, and though she avoided prison, her name was tarnished forever. She left town quietly, and the HOA officially dissolved. Cedar Oaks, once a monument to control and vanity, became a ghost neighborhood. Houses stood empty, lawns overgrown, street signs half buried in dirt. Some families never came back. Others sold what was left and moved away. The land, free of their grip, began reclaiming it all. Vines crawled up the walls, birds nested in broken roofs, and the silence returned like a long-lost friend. The county eventually transferred full stewardship of the preserved area to a local environmental foundation. They asked me to serve as caretaker. I accepted, on one condition, that the land remain untouched: no tourist paths, no gift shops, no educational pavilions. Just nature, as it wanted to be. They agreed. The foundation brought volunteers, students, conservationists, and old-timers who remembered what the wetlands looked like before the highway. Together, we planted native grasses, rebuilt beaver dams, and cleared debris from the flood. Each day felt like a small act of redemption. Dr. Hart visited often, still running her research programs. She'd become a friend, one of the few I trusted. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the fireflies rise over the water. The sun was setting behind the hills, and the air was thick with the sound of crickets. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Once," I admitted. "After the flood, I thought maybe I should start over somewhere else. But then I realized, this is my story. This land and we've been through hell together. I can't just walk away now." She smiled. "Then maybe it's not the end of your story. Maybe it's the beginning of the land's." I thought about that for a while. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't about me at all. Maybe I was just the voice the land used to defend itself. Over the next year, the wetlands transformed completely. The water cleared, frogs multiplied, herons nested, and fish returned to the streams. You'd never know a highway once cut through this place. Nature has a way of forgiving itself faster than people ever do. Sometimes, though, on quiet mornings, I still walk to the spot where the old road had been. The last fragment of asphalt remained half buried in the mud, cracked and covered in moss. I kept it there on purpose, a reminder. A monument not to what was destroyed, but to what endured. And every now and then, when the wind blew just right, I could almost hear my father's voice in the reeds. "See, son," he'd say. "The land remembers." The first winter after everything ended was the quietest I'd ever known. The air over the wetlands turned crisp and sharp, the reeds frozen stiff with silver frost. Each morning I'd wake to the sound of geese flying south, their calls echoing across the valley like ghosts of the storm that once tore through here. By then, the wetlands had become almost unrecognizable. The scars of the highway were fading, replaced by winding streams that glimmered under pale sunlight. The smell of asphalt had long vanished, replaced by the clean scent of pine and cold water. Life was returning in ways I couldn't have imagined, foxes hunting along the shore, otters darting between cattails, owls nesting in the old cypress grove. And in that quiet, I finally learned something I'd never understood before: peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of understanding. I started writing then. Not for the papers or the court, but for myself, for the land. I kept a journal, every page filled with memories of how it looked before the HOA, before the flood, before greed tried to claim what didn't belong to it. I wrote about the small things, the way dragonflies hovered over still water, how the mist moved across the fields at dawn, how the frogs sang after the first rain of spring. Sometimes I'd imagine my father sitting beside me as I wrote, nodding in approval, his rough hands folded over his knees. "Keep it honest," he'd say. "The land don't need fancy words. Just truth." So that's what I gave it, truth. One afternoon, as I was stacking firewood behind the cabin, a truck pulled up the dirt path. It was an old Ford with a forestry department emblem on the side. A young ranger stepped out, clipboard in hand, and waved politely. "Mr. Lawson," he called. "I'm with the State Preservation Council. We're surveying all registered natural reserves. Just checking in." I nodded and offered him some coffee. We sat on the porch, sipping quietly as he looked out over the water. "Hard to believe this was a construction site once," he said. "Looks like it's been untouched for centuries." "That's how it's supposed to look," I said. He smiled. "You've done good work here. Not many people fight for land like this anymore. Most folks sell, move on." I shrugged. "It's not about fighting. It's about listening." He glanced at me, curious. "Listening? To what it wants to be," I said. "The land tells you everything if you're quiet enough." He jotted something down on his clipboard, maybe a note about the caretaker's philosophy. But I didn't care. I wasn't speaking for him. I was speaking to the wind, the reeds, the slow rhythm of the water's return. As he left, he turned back once more. "You know, they're naming this place officially next month." The council voted unanimously. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What's it going to be called?" He smiled. "Lawson Wetlands Preserve." For a long moment, I couldn't say a word. My throat tightened, my vision blurred, and I just nodded. After he drove off, I sat there for a while, letting the news settle like silt in still water. It wasn't pride I felt. It was something deeper, the quiet satisfaction of knowing the story had come full circle. That night, as the wind picked up and the moon hung low over the hills, I walked to the water's edge one last time. The stars shimmered across the surface like scattered embers. I knelt down, touched the cold mud, and whispered softly, "We made it." I wasn't talking about myself. I was talking to the land, to my father's memory, to every root and feather and stone that had survived. A few months later, the Preservation Council held a small ceremony. Nothing fancy, just a few tents, a podium, and a modest crowd of environmentalists, locals, and students. Dr. Hart was there, smiling proudly. When they called my name, I stepped up to the microphone, but I didn't have a speech prepared. I looked at the crowd, at the rolling hills beyond them, and said, the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. I just did what any son would do, I protected what my father taught me to love. There was a moment of silence. Then the crowd clapped, not the loud kind that fills the air, but the gentle, grateful kind that seeps into your chest and stays there. After the ceremony, a young girl approached me. She couldn't have been more than 12, holding a sketchbook and a shy smile. Mr. Lawson, she said, my class is doing a project about the flood and the wetlands. I drew you a picture. She opened the book to reveal a drawing of the wetlands, bright greens, shimmering blues, a little cabin by the water. And in the center, a man standing beside a heron, both looking toward the sunrise. It's beautiful, I said softly. You captured it perfectly. She grinned. My teacher said the land came back because you didn't give up. I smiled back. No, sweetheart. The land came back because it never stopped trying. When she left, I stayed behind for a while, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. The reeds swayed gently in the evening wind, and the sound of the frogs rose again, soft and steady, the same song that had filled my childhood. That night, I dreamed of the flood again. But this time, it wasn't destruction I saw. It was cleansing, the water washing away the greed, the lies, the noise. Leaving behind something pure. In the dream, I stood knee-deep in clear water, and my father stood across from me, smiling. Told you, boy, he said. You just had to let it breathe. When I woke, the first light of dawn was spilling through the cabin window. The air smelled of pine and wet soil. I brewed a cup of coffee and stepped outside, watching the mist lift from the water. Everything was still. Peaceful. Whole. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free. Years have passed since then. Tourists occasionally visit, researchers come and go, and sometimes schools bring children for nature walks. But the land remains wild, untamed, alive. And so do I. I've grown older, slower, grayer. But when I walk the same paths I once fought for, I see more than just trees and water. I see memory. I see survival. I see proof that even when men forget, the earth remembers. Sometimes I stop by that last piece of asphalt still buried in the mud. I leave a small stone on top each time, a ritual of sorts, a promise never to let the past be erased completely. And when the wind blows just right, carrying the scent of rain over the valley, I swear I can hear the faint whisper of my father's voice again, steady, proud, unbroken. You did good, son. You listened. I close my eyes, breathe in the silence, and smile. Because in the end, the land doesn't just forgive, it teaches. And I was lucky enough to learn.